Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for waking up and joining us for this event. As you all know, this is a very important topic, especially with our region keeping up with the trends, the demographic trends in the country. And we're all going to have this conversation this morning at a different place, so it's okay. I want to just say right now, this is a safe space. There is no stupid question. There is no stupid ideas or thoughts. We have to have a solid understanding of how to do this work if we're going to make meaningful progress. So, now we got that out of the way. First and foremost, some of us today, potentially this could be our first time even engaging in this kinds of conversation. So at the end, I want to open up for questions. Don't be shy, raise your hand, I'll get to you. For others of us, we might have led a million initiatives and efforts around diversity and inclusion and trying to enhance representation of underrepresented groups in the workplace, and you might be confronting diversity fatigue. So this morning we want to have the first conversation, not the last conversation. I don't know how many of you know, but we have just joined and partnered with the city and the National League of Cities and the Racial Equity and Leadership Initiative. Letitia Doucette is here from the city of Rochester, a great teammate in that effort. And so this is something that we're committed to, and we want to be committed that employers who are willing to do the work have the tools and the understanding to do it. So without further ado, we have a wonderful panelists here this morning. And I want to start off with Sarah Taylor on the end. Just introduce yourself, how you engage in this work on a daily basis, and let's get the conversation going.
Sarah Taylor. I have a couple roles in the community. My full-time job, I'm Vice President of Employment at Rochester Rehabilitation Center and lead the Employment Division, and have been a very strong advocate for individuals with disabilities who are seeking employment. I also have another role as a community organizer and convener and consultant, and have been very verbal as well as active in trainings, particularly related to advancing women of color in leadership roles around the state, and really developing forums for that conversation, coaching and mentorship opportunities, and having measurable outcomes regarding how can we move that dial to advance women of color in leadership roles.
Thank you, Sarah. John Paul?
John Paul Perez, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Catholic Family Center. I've been involved in the social services field for a little over 20 years, primarily focusing on poverty and homelessness. I currently sit on the Governor's Interagency Council on Homelessness, and glad to be here.
Thank you, John Paul.
Beatrice LeBron, Commissioner of the Rochester City School Board, one of 7. And also by day, I work at Rochester Regional Health as a community health worker, so I engage day-to-day in my community, helping people access health care in a different way, linkage to services, not just a referral with a phone call. That method does not work. We will always have the same health outcomes if that's how we approach the health field. And engaging in this work, obviously I'm a minority myself, however, I like to think that I'm a little bit more urban in the work and how I represent myself, and I do that purposely. I'm originally from the Bronx, and I feel that I want to be my authentic self wherever I go. That does not mean that I don't put 100% work into, effort into my work, that I don't come strong, that I'm not analytical, that I'm not a strong leader. It just means that I truly believe that I would like to see the kids in my community understand that they can get to higher levels of leadership being themselves and not having to assimilate into something that they're not. So I'm a very strong advocate for that as well.
Thank you.
Go after you.
I
I thought I was going to go first, Last she'll be last. My name is Jared Felton. I'm a financial advisor. I'm in my 15th year. I am born and raised in Rochester, New York. There's a lot of scenarios that I've been in that I'm sure we'll touch upon that you'll ask about that bring the conversation of diversity and inclusion into the mix. I'm sure we all have for the most part. My role, I'll get into that a little bit more as we go, but as far as what I do on a day-to-day basis, it's really just making sure people or organizations and their employees, hit their goals with regards to what it is they're looking to do down the road for retirement, saving for college, things like that. But more importantly, I think what's the biggest takeaway about what I do is it's much bigger than that. It's really just making sure that I understand where everybody is at in their life right then and there. So I have to meet them where they're at. And in order to do that, the conversation for diversity and inclusion is really important for not just my team, but also my work environment, because the more diversity brings up teachable moments, learning experiences, and through that, we can also serve the needs of many more instead of just a few.
Thank you, Jared. So with that being said, I want to go back to a comment I made earlier on about how we're all getting in this work at different stages. So just our early conception of this work, or the spectrum of this work, is some of you here might come from a background where you're completely unaware about why this is important, how to do it, things of that nature. Some of you may be in a place or a workplace or work setting where compliance is important. So maybe there's some kind of legislation or a litigated effect or some tax credits or incentives. So compliance is your goal at this point. Some of you might have a little bit more progressive workplaces where you, under some kind of corporate citizenship, understand that having different people represented in your work environment is important, so you go a little bit beyond compliance, but still in a sense where representation is the ultimate goal. Beyond that, where integration is important, inclusion is important, some of you may have a workplace where it's not about if the door is opened or closed, but if the door is actually enlarging, the doorway is actually enlarging. So it's not about who gets access, it's about the barriers to access being removed. And then ultimately, our ultimate goal is a workplace where human equity is the most important thing. We've understood how it plays into the business model, and it's about valuing the individual. So going beyond the representation of individuals of underserved groups, it's about how do I bring the most qualified human talent here and appreciate them for who and what they are, what they bring to the table, and give them the ability to contribute in the most effective and efficient way. So, for those of us who are at the beginning and you could potentially be unaware, this is your first time even having this conversation, I want to open it up to our panelists, to whoever feels like they have a response. Talk about why this work is important. To those of us who this is the first day, they're right there at the train stop, about to get on, why should they get on this train?
I'll start, I guess.
No rush.
Well, first of all, I mean, one of my passions in life is really getting people to reach their fullest human potential. I think that ultimately when we go back to our families, when we go back to our community, or when we go back to our staff, getting people to feel safe, be in an environment where they feel like things are equitable, where they can feel like they're in an environment where things are inclusive, that's important for all of us. The one thing I don't want to minimize, though, today are the effects of diversity, inclusion, and equity in your business. It is a moral imperative we should work on. It's an ethical thing that, of course, we all need to get better at as a community, as individuals, but it makes business sense to do this work. And please don't leave here understanding that this is just a moral or ethical thing. The S&P 500, in 1965, if you look at the S&P 500, I think it was something like the average life expectancy to live in that S&P 500 was about 33 years. By 1990, it was about 20 years. Today, it's about 14 years. The projected lifespan will be for S&P 500s in the next decade, 50% of them will be gone. What does that say? That says that we know that in today's day and age, competition is fierce. And you need to be a unicorn, not just once, but you need to be a unicorn every 10 years. What I want to propose for you today is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of how you get that competitive advantage. One of the goals for a business is how do we outbehave the competition?
That's right.
How do we outbehave the competition? And one way to do that is understanding that diversity can be mandated. Anybody can do diversity. But inclusion has to be cultivated. So hopefully you can leave here understanding that you have to cultivate that inclusion within your business model, as you said, Adrian, so you can outbehave the competition. It's the only way you're going to survive.
That's right, especially given the demographic trends of the country. Any other panelists?
I'll take a stab. So on my side of the business in finance, Black and African American make up between 3 and 8% of financial advisors, and that's true within my own company. So about maybe 15,000 financial advisors across the U.S. for Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. There's maybe somewhere between 2 and 280, and that's it. Now, some may say that's terrible. Some say it sucks. Since 2000, I think it was 14 when they first started. The number was in the 100s. So, I mean, there has been growth, it's been slow. However, you know, we start to think about what are some of the things that they're doing and some of the initiatives that they're taking, you know, to try and tap into, you know, that potential. And what Adrian was saying, I love the word you use is access, because, you know, in my world, some people think financial people are, you know, hard to access, or unless you have billions or millions, we won't even talk to you. That same goes for people that are looking for a job. And it can be somewhat intimidating or daunting. The way that I got pulled into Merrill Lynch specifically was it was someone that reached out to me, African-American advisor, been in the business for over 28 years, very successful, but if it wasn't for the outreach, you know, it wouldn't happen. So I think that the conversations around, you know, diversity and inclusion, it obviously goes far beyond just, you know, Black and African-American, especially nowadays. But I think it's important to realize that I think when dealing with certain demographics, hearing it from one of their own, you know, is going to be a little bit different. And even though I was raised in Penfield, went to a private school my whole life, it was just a different sort of reach out. But the guy randomly called me and said, "Hey, can we talk?" I was like, "Why?" But, you know, it turned into something really, really beautiful, and I started to see what are a lot of the initiatives that they're doing, you know, at the company I'm at. So this isn't really a plug for my company, but it's more so to let you know that the concept of, you know, focusing, you know, being intentional, you know, about what you're doing is going to be far greater than just we have a bunch of mandates and we're just going to send out a news blast saying we're interviewing. And hopefully people just see it that fit these pockets that we're looking for. That makes sense, though.
So I just want to add too, when we're talking about like inclusion and diversity, for me I always feel like all skin folk and kin folk. So again, it goes back to, you know, who are the demographics that you're serving and making sure that you have adequate representation to those demographics. You know, at Rochester Regional Health, my team specifically are community health workers. We have a wide range of individuals who represent different communities because we tend to work with folks who are homeless. Well, I've been homeless, so I can relate to people who are homeless and experiencing homelessness. But we also serve a large immigrant and refugee population. Well, we have to have representation for them as well because I'm not a refugee and I'm not an immigrant, and so I cannot relate all the way to some of the barriers that they have to face. One, getting into the country, and that, you know, let me tell you guys, and I'll share this tidbit, I learned that you're only refugee for 1 year. And so we tend to call people who are refugees when they first enter the country refugees forever, but they're not. They're only refugee for 1 year, then they go into immigration status, and then there's a process for them to become new Americans, which is the new term now. So those are things I had to learn too. So even though I feel I'm very diverse, there's still a lot of diversity I myself had to learn. And so it's really important to do the work. Again, when we're talking about outcomes and we're talking about goals and how we reach those goals and those outcomes, you absolutely have to have representation and inclusion in those conversations. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not having it and realizing, hey, we need to figure out how to get that inclusion in these conversations. And I'll throw this out there, Gucci specifically just went through some backlash from primarily the Black and brown community, where they're being boycotted right now because they sent out a design with a black turtleneck with a red face. Actually, I was getting dressed this morning, and I was like, oh, let me make sure I but, you know, what came out of that was that they didn't have any black designers on that team. They didn't have anybody black at the table to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not probably the smartest thing to do right now. And they didn't realize the impact that the black community does have in their outcomes and in their income. And so, you know, of course, they sent out an apology. Now they're trying to hire more diverse designers, and they're being boycotted until they hire more black designers on the team and they're at the table. And so I share that because that could have been avoided had they taken some steps to have inclusion and diversity at the table.
I just wanted to chime in real quick. I'm not good. So basically, an increasing question that I get from a lot of people, whether it's an individual or the head of an organization, is, you know, what's the culture like, you know, on your team, but more importantly, what's the culture like at your company? Do you like it? Are you comfortable? Are you the only black financial advisor? What do you think? You know, and I think that's just to that it's a reminder. It's a constant reminder for me to always be mindful about who my audience is, who I'm talking to, you know, and what is it they're expecting to get from me. So with your stat about businesses failing, you know, every 10 years, Financial advisors fail every 2, 3, 4 years. They don't really last all that long. It's hard because you have to be able to identify with a lot of folks. It's hard for one person to do that. You just can't. It's a team. It's a team.
I think just to buttress that a little bit, that's important for business-to-customer relationships, but also B2B, business-to-business as well. Forbes did a study of, I think, 1,700 businesses, and the ones that were most diverse had 19% higher revenue because of their ability to adapt to different markets and to go out to B2B and say, look, we're going to look out, we're not only going to focus on diversity within our own business, but who we actually interact with will also be diverse. That's important, particularly in a globalized economy, right?
So as you see, the panel is warmed up to have this conversation.
We're done.
So I just want to reiterate some things that you did hear, though, so that you get that. There was points raised around, for the business side, it's about access to talent. And some businesses, when they integrate diversity and inclusion efforts into their business model, recognize that if you have a more representative talent core, I want to get away from saying workforce because worker feels more commodifying of an individual. Talent is more value-based language, so just for everybody's mental notes. But when you have a diversified talent core within your company, reflective of the customer base it's trying to serve, that talent core can help inform institutional practice, okay? So to Beatrice's point about the Gucci sweater, if there were other people in the room, they would have known that that sweater and design would have been found offensive, and this backlash was going to probably cost them millions of dollars, and boycott wouldn't even be an issue to begin with. So that's important. On the worker or job seeker side, it's about access to opportunity. So just reiterating the point from earlier, it's about diversity where a company thinks about how do we have more of a underrepresented group in our company, which is still group-oriented thinking, right? Predicated on the idea that there's a majority in the workplace, and how do we just add to that majority? Versus the other way of thinking inclusion, which is how do we remove barriers to entry? How is it a conversation that goes from if the door is open or closed to not only is the door open, but it actually gets larger, okay? So those are some important points to reiterate here. I want to follow up, and I want to kind of start with you, Commissioner LeBron, because I feel like education is fundamental here. Here in Rochester, we have some pretty, detrimental segregation along the lines of geography, race, socioeconomic background, and so with racial equity being a different subset, because of the history of the country, how does that impact this work? More importantly, I want to start with you, Commissioner LeBron, because we all know in our community here, the Rochester City School District prepares kids who look like myself and you at a disproportionate rate for career and college readiness. So if a person of color is able to secure that entry-level position but can't move up, not because the company isn't offering opportunities, but because they potentially might lack the wherewithal and ability to do so, how can businesses engage in that work?
So, he put me right on the spot with the Rochester City School District. So first, if you have not noticed, I like to speak from the most realist possible standpoint as possible. And I often go back and forth with my colleagues who may feel sometimes like you're always talking negative, and it's like, no, I'm talking about the facts that are in front of us, and I don't want to sugarcoat things. So obviously the Rochester City School District is really not in a good place. And I would say that that's actually a reflection of where you have diversity, right, at the table, and still there's like a disconnect, and it goes back to all skin folk and kinfolk. And so sometimes some of the decisions
really
that
quick,
they make.
What you're talking about there is diversity of thought. Right?
Yeah, it's diversity of thought. So someone, just because you're a person of color does not mean that you have the same shared experiences that I have. And so that's the saying that we say is, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So you guys learned something else today. However, unfortunately, because we have the folks at the table that we've had some poor results. And I will say I'm a parent in this district, so I have 2 girls that went through this district. And as a parent, I fought the district on many superintendents that we've gone through lots of folks. And particularly, I do believe that whoever the next superintendent is really has to have, again, a strong sense of the diversity that we serve in our district. And not just on the fact that we're majority black and brown students, but all of the layers that our students are coming in with and have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So how do businesses engage? Well, I can tell you that the Rochester City School District has done a very poor job of engaging the business community, of working with the business community, and allowing folks to come in and to give additional resources and scholarships and internships. There was a company in Rochester, and I won't name names just out of respect for them, but they were doing some wonderful work, and they had an opportunity to give out some scholarships and some internships, and they were having a really difficult time just accessing 26 students to apply. We have 26,000 students, and they couldn't even get less than 0.01% of our population. Why? Because it reached out to some folks in central office. They were given the runaround. But someone said, yeah, we'll take the information, but then it actually never made it to the schools, to the chiefs, to the principals, to the teachers. And so the Rochester City School District has a lot of work to do on its own. So that, I would say, is an example where diversity lays, but still there's a lot of issues that are not being addressed adequately. But I do think that in order to be successful, everybody needs to be at the table, and we need to welcome everybody at the table, and that includes you guys here who are coming from different sectors. So that includes our non-for-profit folks. We need you guys too. That does include our finance folks. I've doing some work now with Chad Rifflin over at Consumer Credit Counseling. Kids don't know what credit is. Their parents may not understand what credit is. Kids don't have access to a bank account. We have Summer of Opportunity through the City of Rochester, which employs them, but it does not set them up with a bank account. It does not set them up to have conversations around credit. So even though I think there are a lot of resources in the community, are we utilizing them in the best way? No. There are a lot of businesses that want to help, right? Companies that want to support our students. And so for us at the district, I believe that we do have to have an open, honest conversation with everyone around us and welcome you all. And so I'm working on figuring out a pathway to welcome folks to the table. Because I do think that you guys also have a lot of knowledge and experience that would benefit our kids. But because we're not there, we're producing our kids who are not college and career ready, kids who end up going to MCC, which I love. I went to MCC, let me just throw this out there. But even when they get to MCC, they're not college ready, right? And so they have to take remedial courses, and that taps into their financial aid. And so there are implications for the outcomes that we're producing that are lifelong and generation long.
Which is why this work with the district is important.
It's important. So we need you guys there at the table too.
I want to tie in, Sarah, because of the work that you do, especially with black female leadership in the non-for-profit sector. You wrote a really insightful piece for the Democratic Chronicle last year. Just talk about how racial equity is a part of this work to accomplishing the broader mission of diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Well, years of experience in non-for-profits. And when you look at 400 non-for-profits in this community that serve large minority populations, and I can count on one hand the number of female leaders of color in our community. So as I began to do research, as I was desiring to advance my career, hit a number of different walls and ceilings, and began to have conversations around the state with women of color who contacted me after the article, whether it was Asian, Middle Eastern, Latina women, said, thank you for speaking up. The barrier is there. And so we began to have conversations, what are the barriers for women of color advancing? And I believe it was the Building Movement Project out of New York City who began to do research around the country of what are those barriers, and began to release studies that show that internal biases, board lack of knowledge of what to look for. Boards were focused on the fundraising aspect of it, that there was a disconnect in what boards were looking for when selecting leaders of nonprofits. So how do we have the conversations not just with the leaders of nonprofits, but the governing bodies of nonprofit organizations. And how do we develop, in a fair and equitable way, succession planning and mentorship opportunities for individuals that don't look like you, that may desire to advance their careers. So I think when we talk about equity and career advancement, are you being inclusive? Is your organization being inclusive? Developing internal practices with measurable results. We hear leaders of organizations often out publicly saying, we believe in this, we embrace it, but internally in our organizations, from the top down, are we really practicing inclusion and openness to differences, and developing those that may not be individuals that you work with on a day-to-day aspect, and really looking at that frontline management and directors that are there working with direct care staff. Are they mentoring and coaching and developing the skill sets that individuals come to the workplace with? So we have a long way to go as a community as we look at diversifying our leaderships in nonprofits. And to speak to your original question that you asked when Beatrice responded, what can companies do? We work actively with the Poverty Initiative and various employment work groups, helping to move that dial for individuals with disabilities also, who often face barriers. And we know the unemployment rate is double, we know, to those that don't have disabilities. So what employers can do when we're in the training phases, when individuals are in high school, the on-the-job readiness programs, apprenticeships, internships, and really being a part of designing training programs, just not waiting until training programs are designed, but being a part of the model. What are you looking for in job functions, in job skill sets to fill that pipeline? We keep hearing about all these job openings in this community and not enough bodies to field qualified, skilled workers to fill it. It's a company's responsibility too to meet the training provider and educational providers so we can fill that pipeline.
Really good insights. I know you all have been listening to the panel for quite some time. I want to open it up to you who may have questions and you've been sitting on them for a while, because I know you've been getting so much. So are there any questions? Please, Joe.
Yeah, so you spoke to like bringing qualified candidates and raising the skill level of the community. So we have a ton of phenomenal graduate programs in the Rochester area between Brockport, U of R, Fisher, RIT. How do those programs who currently don't represent the Rochester demographic, if you look at their working professional programs, reach those candidates and bring those candidates into the program and help develop the skill set of underrepresented groups in the community?
So really quick, before I bring it up to the panel, I want to say this. So if you listen to Sarah kind of talk about the disparities in the not-for-profit world at the leadership levels, which has implications on how they perform the work that they do and administer the work that they do. And then I started with Beatrice at K-12. What I need us all to connect here is that for many people in our community, they are starting at a deficit and a disadvantage, just basically off the systems and services that are being provided to them. So something that we all know as fundamental attribution error, which I'm sure the not-for-profit world here is familiar with that term, when it talks about taking into account all of the variables and factors that have put a person in a situation or circumstance where they're at a competitive disadvantage, to John Paul's point, in the labor market, and ultimately can never maximize or accomplish the human talent that they have on the inside, which ultimately has implications on our world of work and the productivity of our region. So now opening up to our team here, what are some interventionist ways?
I think recruitment. I hear all the time, oh, we can't find diverse candidates. To give you an example, I plan conferences, so I pride myself in making sure we have 50% experts that are part of the conference. And so last year I seen a brochure for, I think it was a substance abuse conference. And when I looked at the brochure, there was not one person of color as a presenter. And so I contacted the coordinator and said, I can find you 10 social workers of color. I can find you 20 substance abuse counselors with credentials. Where did you recruit for this conference? So when people tell me they can't find candidates, diverse candidates, and as you mentioned, to give you an example, one of our large academic institutions has an executive leadership program, an ED program, that graduated hundreds of individuals of color in their executive ED program. So when we're looking for faculty of color, you graduated hundreds of color. How are you recruiting? Are you engaging? What is your engagement strategies? I say it all the time in community mental health when individuals are coming in for counseling in our mental health centers. How can you serve 70% minority populations and have no therapists and psychiatrists of color? Where are you recruiting? I can find them. I can pick up the phone and give you names of qualified, and I want to say qualified individuals to recruit from. So when I hear recruiters and institutions say they can't find candidates, I want to know where you're looking. Because I can find you a microbiologist, I can find you a pharmacist, anyone, they're out there. Where are you recruiting from? So I think we need to look at where we're recruiting from and pull in help when we are struggling with recruiting, pull in some help to say, I do need help.
So ultimately what I'm hearing you say is there needs to be a plethora of perspectives around the table when those recruitment conversations are being had.
Absolutely.
Just addressing kind of you talked about how can we broaden that door. One of the issues, just a practical example of what Catholic Family Center is trying to do to address this is, it's often referred to as diversity as sort of being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked and welcomed to dance. And so CFC is thinking about how can we do a better job of welcoming people to the dance. And what we've learned is a lot of our minority, particularly our line staff, are terrified of academics, terrified of school. So we're partnering with St. John Fisher College to do something called the Clemente Course Project, which is we're going to actually provide free daycare, free dinner for our line staff who are interested to actually get them to go to school. They'll be doing like 3 or 4 humanities courses. They'll get 2 or 3 college course credits. It's not A, B, C, D grade, it's pass, fail, just to kind of get their feet wet and get them through the door so they can begin just to be comfortable with school. Because I'll tell you, to answer your question, I mean, some people are just terrified to apply. They don't have the cultural capital to just feel confident into an interview process or anything like that. And that's something that we're trying to see if we can tackle.
Really quick.
Very quickly, I want to say recruitment, absolutely, and having inclusion at the recruitment conversation, but retention is another piece that colleges need to look at. Because you recruit someone and then they come in and they're not feeling like they can be supported and be included, and they will eventually take flight. And so when you're having recruitment conversations, please start having retention conversations as well. They're equally important.
Yeah, so all really good points, and I want to just thread that on the last point made by Commissioner LeBron. Ultimately, if you invite a person, you make them feel welcome to participate. Participation impacts performance. Performance impacts productivity. Productivity impacts profitability. So that's the thread to connect to how, to John Paul's piece, it's not about just being there, but actively engaging and being able to contribute. More questions from our wonderful audience here. Andre?
So, I work at Trillium Health, and one of our core values is education. Specifically with a focus of reaching the young people. I know you talked about this a little bit, Commissioner LeBron.
Oh, we worked together a long time ago.
And so we are partnering with some of the Rochester City Schools, specifically School Without Walls, and working together with East High School as well. The program at the School Without Walls having a senior-based project and having students who are interested, say, for our organization, healthcare. There's a few students over there who want to be nurses or doctors, and for the past few years, we've been taking those students on, bringing them in on that level to really get that education, to really get that experience. I think it's important. I know the panel has been talking a lot about colleges. We know that college is so expensive, right? And especially for minority students who may not have the funds even going in. You're talking about retention. That's a huge issue when we're talking about city residents who may not even have those funds. So we believe it's important to reach those students on that level so that they can get that experience before they go into the college realm, and to say, this is really what I want to do, or you know what, I've had this experience, I don't think that's necessarily it for me. That prevents changing majors in college, which then can increase the amount of money they're paying. So I'm asking, is there more schools in the district that offer these project-based programs where I can tap into to reach some of these schools and to get more of these students to come on board and to really get that education, especially not even just from a healthcare, as in say a nurse or a doctor, but we have other departments as well. We have a marketing department. We have project management, care managers as well. So there's opportunities for all of our organization to reach these students. So I would just like to know other ways that I can tap into, say, the Rochester City School District to reach these students on that level before they go on into the college years.
So let me just point out that you named 2 schools that actually have more autonomy than some of our other schools. And so when those schools have autonomy, they have a little bit more say-so themselves and who they partner with. And that's a big issue in the district. We have schools that we've given some autonomy to, or 100% autonomy, and then other schools that were like, nope, central office completely controls and everything has to go through us. And so there's an imbalance there on how decisions are made. And it's unfortunate because then you have schools that have a program already in place, and then you have a parent saying, well, why can't my school do this? And they may not understand that autonomy is like the biggest piece right there. I know that we do have programs with Rochester Regional Health. We have kids that go out and work at the hospital, and we also have our special needs students who work at Unity in St. Mary's. So I do, yes. So to answer your question, yes. You and I can have a conversation after this. If anybody wants to start having those conversations, I'll stick around for a little bit and collect cards and send a group email. We can start having these conversations. But we still, you know, I'm fighting for schools to have autonomy at the district level. That's really, at the end of the day, that's really where we're going to see the biggest changes if we allow our principals to be leaders and lead their teachers and their staff, and allow schools to be their own kind of guiding ship, right, versus the people at central office. And those are much bigger, deeper conversations that we cannot have here today or solve here today.
Any more questions from our wonderful audience, please?
So I've been in the legal profession for probably about 25 years at various firms and whatever employer settings. And I'm not going to say recruiting is easy, especially, you know, in upstate, I think all of upstate New York, not just Rochester, you know, young people want to go to the big cities, so we face that challenge no matter what ethnic, racial background they are. So we do, I think, okay as far as recruiting, and that's a challenge because people of color are actually not applying to law school as much anymore, and, you know, anyway. But retention is the big problem. You know, at firms, the courts, whatever legal employer they are with, and how do you help the employers, or how can the employers be more aware to become more inclusive so that they are helping retention. You know, I think if you ask a lot of legal employers, they're like, oh no, we're great, you know, look at our website page on diversity, we're wonderful. And I do think they mean well, but, you know,
I can speak to that. My son was a CPA in merge and acquisition down on Wall Street, highly credentialed, and he was not in auditing, he was in merge and acquisition. So he worked on the multi-billion-dollar deals. So he would have an opportunity to go from Big Five to another Big Five. And so he said to a couple of the firm partners, does it make sense for me to come to you if you're not going to invest in me to advance as a partner? So when we talk about these firms, and it's not just about getting the job, but if I get the job and I'm here and working and producing, making multi-million dollars, is there an opportunity for me to advance, to become a partner? And that was his struggle, is there was not many people that looked like him in merge and acquisition that was willing to personally invest in his development as a partner. He wanted equal opportunity to become a partner. So I can speak from that experience. And my daughter-in-law, African American, she's a pharmacist and a cancer researcher, highly qualified. And as she seeks to advance her career in the cancer research and having opportunities, not just to come on the team, but is there an opportunity to advance? And when we hit that wall, that ceiling, as I call often the black ceiling, we wonder now why the rates for minority women and businesses are on the rise. They're not on the rise because people just want to leave and start their own business. They're on the rise because advancement, we hit a ceiling. So people leave and start their own business. And that's why the numbers, statistically, I was reading last year in Fortune magazine an article of why the minority women-owned businesses is on the rise. And when they surveyed the women, it wasn't because they wanted to start their own business. They hit a block. And so when we talk about retention, is there equal opportunity for advancement in partnerships?
So I want to just tie into that as well, because it's really important. I think this is the nail on the head here when we think about maximizing human capital. It's really important that when employers do this work, to John Paul's point earlier, to give themselves a competitive advantage and be an employer of choice. That's key here. Because if we collectively do this work, which we're engaged in, we want to help all willing partners do this work as well, we become the city of choice, becoming the region of choice. As America begins to brown, and even with us having discussions around our collegiate integration into our workforce here, because right now we don't do the best job of retaining the folks who come to the RITs and the U of Rs. We have to create the social fabric in addition to workplace opportunity and career advancement to make people feel welcome in Rochester and want to stay and contribute in Rochester. So that's a very important piece I just wanted to...
Let me just add too, is that, let me just tell you something that you guys already know, which is that nothing in your business happens organically or just naturally. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden you're more diverse. Like everything in your business has to have right? Everything has to have a project management behind it. So for those of you with paper and pen, let me give you 3 things to go home with, which is you want to be thinking about real problems, real numbers, real consequences. So when you go back to your business, think about what are the real problems within our business for diversity. If one of them, if I look at my senior leadership, it's 85% white, that's a real problem, right? So I need to know some real numbers. I need to look at that data, set metrics for my business, and say by 5 years, by 10 years, that's going to be 50%. It's not going to be 85%. My line staff is going to change dramatically. But I need to have real consequences. We need to keep each other accountable, and that starts at the top, I think. So none of this stuff just kind of like happens. You have to really be intentional about it. There has to be project management behind it. There has to be goals. There has to be metrics, just like anything else in your business model. Can you imagine just saying to your sales team, let's go to like a sales training, and we'll talk about it next year again. Hopefully you'll meet your sales quota. That'd be insane. You'd never do that. And the same goes for everything else. The same goes for diversity, for inclusion, for equity.
And that's what we're developing now, to reiterate our point in the beginning, this toolkit and this work amongst our membership and non-members of companies who really want to move forward and making a more diverse and inclusive workplace.
Quick plug, so in my world, a lot of it's about just like revenue that you bring into the company, right? So, or billable hours, or however you describe it. So we may be somewhat similar in that regards. In a previous life, at a previous firm, I did have a conversation with someone, but it really just took me to start that conversation, but it was with someone that I felt like I could trust and have just an open dialogue with. And he goes, Jared, he goes, to be honest with you, he's like, I was the, out of, I think it was like 190 advisors, there was only 2, and the other guy was like 70, and then there was me, and I was like 22, I was really young. He's like, I don't know what to tell you. And he's like, well, let's figure something out. So he's like, come up with a business plan. Tell me what you think you want to do. So it took about a month or so, and I started to talk to some of my family members who live out of state about what are some of the things that maybe I could do to help change. And basically, I went back to him and said, maybe sending me to a conference here, that's specific to our field, but maybe for African Americans only, or going to here and going to that. So that's a quick takeaway. And for me, that actually worked. My network grew because of that, and because of that, I could also bring it back home and share it with the office. So, anyway.
Any more questions from our wonderful audience? Please.
Yeah, I think John and Sarah has already covered that area. The government gives incentive to hire minorities, but keeping them, give them incentive and making it inclusive, that is lacking. So wherever you go, I'm not giving you anything, but wherever you go. So the quota, they cover quota because they get the credit. But keeping them, they don't give incentive, they don't include them. So people leave.
It goes back to accountability. We work, again, individuals with disabilities and working on the Poverty Initiative Employment Group to encourage companies to hire individuals living in poverty. It's one thing to hire, but what does your environment look like? I can tell you, we have placed a number of refugees out in different corporations, and we get calls, can you come out here? We're having problems. We're like, what's the problems? They're smelling up our cafeteria with the food they're cooking. So that's a performance issue. So I said this in a sense as an example of what, once individuals are hired, what does your internal company look like around inclusivity and embracing diversity? Or are they looked at as problems and issues when things come up? That's what you have to look at internally, not just from the top, but what is going on at middle management? Has your middle management been trained in diversity and inclusion and unconscious biasness? That's critical when we talk about retention. We can place, but that retention and looking at our internal cultures of tolerance and accepting diverse groups.
Yeah, just one little maybe example. We've tried to take a sort of bottoms-up process because we learn a lot from our staff that are diverse and that are at the line level. And one of the things they've brought to our attention in the last year is that we sometimes have diverse policies and procedures that aren't very equitable. And for us, we didn't think of it. I'll give you a simple example is, so a lot of our clients for some of our programs, we provide transportation to our clients. We bring them to appointments, we bring them home, we help them out, we do case management. And so of course you're going to hire people that have a good driving record, and of course you have to have some sort of metric for liability and for insurance purposes to make sure that people who are driving clients are going to be safe. So we set up policies that were like, if you get more than 3 tickets a year or something like that, you could be reprimanded, you might even lose your job. And for us that just makes sense. You don't want dangerous people driving clients, no, right? But we didn't think about the fact that for a lot of our drivers, particularly like white female drivers who run a red light, or what I like to call an orange light. I tend to run those. So if they run an orange light in Pittsburgh, they're less likely to be pulled over by a police officer than an African American male employee who lives in inner city Rochester who happens to run that orange light at 11 o'clock at night. And so all of a sudden we had this policy procedure that on face value makes complete sense. We're trying to keep clients safe, but holy crap, that might be something that really is not equitable. So it's having that lens throughout the sort of stream, the scope of your business is important. And I think also sometimes doing some bottoms up, because again, even all of us, we're still learning. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, and really getting to see what the perspective is of your employees is critical.
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something very quickly. When John mentioned that you want things that are measurable and things that you know how you're improving, there is an initiative happening that's being launched by RIT called Measure Up, looking at where is your baseline right now through a quick impact assessment. And what we're talking about today is one of those key critical areas for a company, in addition to how they run their business and how they interact with the community. So if you're interested in that Measure Up initiative, we do happen to have a workshop tonight for a shameless plug happening at Next Core, but really understanding where that baseline is, and then how can you improve it, how can you measure it as you're going forward. So I love that comment, thank you.
That's a great point. They're actually one of our partners in this. Adrian?
Adrian, could you share more about the REAL initiatives and how will that help businesses with this work?
Okay, that's a great point. So, and to yours as well. So we've signed on with the City of Rochester and the National League of Cities to create ultimately a much more racially equitable region here in Rochester, in our city. The business piece of that, or the workforce piece of that, is going to be led by the Chamber of Commerce. We signed on with the city. So what we want to do is find as many willing employers who want to engage in this work. We're currently developing a toolkit and creating partnerships with folks like Measure Up at RIT to do that quick impact assessment, and then pretty much designing the whole panoply about how do you get from walking in the door, pretty much a homogeneous work environment, probably full of unconscious bias practices that you're not necessarily aware of the effect or the harmful effect that they're having on other demographics of people and ultimately other sources of human talent for your company. And doing the work from visioning to accomplishing the goals set by the company. And so in the next couple of months, we'll probably roll it out. We have a couple of events going on. We have one here. I know the city just had one at St. John Fisher. It'll be next month. There's one planned at St. John Fisher.
That's been canceled.
Okay.
But we're partnering with St. Joseph's Neighborhood with their Racial Equity Justice Institute, Reggie, right? So therefore, we'll have a cohort going through an organizational assessment, and then in September, that cohort will go through intensive training to really look at their organizations about with a racial equity lens.
Right. And so ultimately what we want to make sure all employers who are engaged in this work understand and know is that you're not here on your own. You're not doing this work on your own, but that we want to help inform the process and give you the mental models to conduct the work in an efficient way. Because something that I found out already just doing research on this is a lot of companies are facing diversity fatigue. They've launched some efforts and initiatives in honest to God effort to want to make a difference and to have good intentions. But without that information, without that guidance, it hasn't really led to much. And so even connecting this work with the business case, how it enhances the profitability, understanding how to become the employer of choice. Just a simple example is, if you look at the University of Rochester, more than 50% of their undergraduate body is non-white. And a large number of that, about 21%, is international. So if you want to retain or access that kind of talent, there has to be modifications to your work environment to make those folks feel at home, welcome. So again, back to those 4 Ps. They can participate, they can impact performance, it can impact productivity, and get to profitability. And to your point, Sarah, when you got some workplaces that make folks feel uncomfortable just because of the smell of the food that they eat, or to your point, Beatrice, the linguistic differences, you know, maybe a strong accent or a different language. Those are actually barriers to entry, but they don't just hurt the job seeker, they also hurt and impact the business, which has an impact on the city, which has an impact on the region. And if we're going to turn around the economic fate of Rochester, we have to be a community that's inviting. So, thank you for that question, Adrian. Any more questions from us?
I just want to make a comment. I'm at a bank. We're sitting in a bank. Jared, you hit it right on the head from a finance standpoint. In the finance world, we are not as diverse as we need to be. So we're working on it, and I just want to reiterate that the culture is so important, and that's why I wanted to be here, because our culture, we're trying very hard to hire directors of diversity and get a diversity group that is looking at that. But no one wants to come in if they look at the bank or they look at the financial institution, which typically we could do the same thing on the percentages, we're very low. And look at a culture and say, that's a place I want to be, because the culture's right. So it starts there, and we're working on it. And I think that that's a big problem in the banking world and the finance world.
True. Last one.
And it's not a question, Ann Johnson with App Rochester. Culture is a big challenge, and we can read all the books that are out there on poverty and race and bias. I would just suggest a half-day investment in a poverty simulation will change your life. If you haven't experienced what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone in poverty, and thank goodness if you haven't, but to go through a half day and do that, it's profound. It's understanding. It takes you from awareness to understanding. And then instead of judging someone who might come in to work for you, you all of a sudden have empathy of why they might be where they are. And if you're going to do this effort, you've got to have your management teams and everybody go through. I mean, it is not a fun half day. But when you leave, don't go there, I'm going to have a great time. But, you go and you say, holy cow, now I have a broader understanding. So just a suggestion.
No. And thank you so much for that suggestion. And I wanted to say you've all been a wonderful audience this morning. Give yourselves a hand.